Sir.
Good afternoon, friends. Very warm welcome to all of you who have us online, and some of you who are present here. Delighted that Professor Olivelle is once again associated with the language of Rajeev also, and we focus on today on the philosophy, Olivelle words, and we hope that we've given several talks. We've written this new book, which is come out and was launched recently at the beginning of the month. I myself have been interested in Ashoka for a very, very long time. It's part of my whole project on modern secularism and its cultural underpinnings, cultural historical underpinnings. And I've also written several articles, books which have been published, edited. Some of it have both my paper and Parek's paper in them. And so I'm really delighted that we are able to come together here and talk about Ashoka. And although many students have already heard that earlier in some of the talks, there is one more opportunity for all of them to listen to him, and I also have something played. So thank you very much once again for being with us, and I now invite Parekh to start the conversation.
Thank you. Thank you, Rajeev. Delighted to be once again here at the center, and delighted to be talking to all of you here. As you know, my book, Ashoka, Portrait of a Philosopher King, came out 2 weeks ago from HarperCollins of Delhi. So that is the reason why I'm in Delhi, actually, for the book launch. And took the opportunity to come here, spend a couple of weeks with scholars here at CSDS. And what we are engaged in doing right now is going through and reading carefully the Ashoka's description. What distinguished my book about Ashoka from many others that have come before is the fact that I have based what I talk about Ashoka solely on his own words, his own inscriptions. So that's where our focus will be today. How we can develop a way of finding what Ashoka was trying to do, his own philosophy, his own moral philosophy, his own way of governing his country. So that's what we have been doing, and we will. In the first part of my book, I deal with Ashoka as king. And we often fail to recognize the fact that Ashoka's primary identity is that of the king who ruled over a very large empire, so therefore rightly has been called emperor. His territory over which he ruled stretched from what is today eastern Afghanistan to what is today West Bengal, maybe even East Bengal, down to about Karnataka. It's a very large area of the subcontinent. In the first part of my book, I deal actually with what we know about society, over which he ruled, but especially I talk about Ashoka as a writer, builder, and it is these two qualities of Ashoka that have made us able to understand, explore what he did. Ashoka was right. Actually, the earliest writing from ancient India comes from Ashoka inscriptions. We have no other true writing. The writings of Ashoka, about 4,100 some words, not large, but for inscriptional purposes, that's substantial. It's these writings that were deciphered in the middle of the last century that has given us entry point to the thoughts of Ashoka. There are many writings about Ashoka, coming especially from Buddhist tradition, both the southern Sri Lanka and the northern, the Sanskrit version. But they were written 3-4 centuries after the death, and are have much more to do with the history of Buddhism than actually Ashoka. I talk about Ashoka as a period because some of the oldest monumental architecture we have from India, really some of the most memorable, most elegant architectural monuments from ancient India were those of Ashoka, especially the Ashokan pillars, the Ashokan castles that went over. So, those two aspects of Ashoka that I explore, first chapter, king, he had resources to do that, he had power to do it. And that's what brings us to what we want to talk about today, substantive way, Ashoka's own thinking, his own philosophy. That's something that we like to do. Ashoka, in his inscriptions, many times, and today we were reading the inscriptions and we talked about it, compares himself to what went before. He talks about in times gone by, in the past, these things happen. But with me, new things. What he inaugurates, he thinks he's inaugurating a new era. A new era that we can call the era of Dharma. The term Dharma, of course, looks large in Ashoka's writings. This Dharma is difficult to interpret in terms of what we have in other parts, in other traditions of India. What many people have tried to see the Buddhist Dharma as part of Ashoka Dharma, and that's not really the case. He was a Buddhist. He said so in the first minor inscription. But his Dharma that he proclaims in the 14 rock inscriptions and the 7 pillar inscriptions is something quite different from the simply Buddhist. He thought of his Dharma as something that anyone in his heart could embrace. It was a moral philosophy that was universal in its application. And actually, he thought that this Dharma would be accepted and embraced by people outside of India. He's talked about diplomatic mission that he sent to the Greek kingdoms of the West, what is today the Middle East, all the way to Egypt, and to countries, the southern borders of its empire, all the way to Sri Lanka. So his Dharma is a inclusivist, universal moral philosophy. And this moral philosophy could be embraced by anybody, in spite of the fact that that person may be to or believer in the kinds of religions that existed at his time. he refers to three kinds of religious organization that he called Bhargava. And he talked about four such concepts. One was Buddhist, another was Brahminical, third was Ajivaka, and fourth was the Jain. And he also talked about other paths. So clearly, there were many other religious traditions that existed during his time. Anybody belonging to one of these paths could at the same time subscribe to and participate in Ashoka's universal. And I have tried to realize this Dharma of Ashoka as an imperial theology or a civil religion. Okay? In other words, a moral philosophy that could unify and give people a sense of belonging to a larger entity. So that's what I'm trying to do in the book. The central theme of his Dharma philosophy was the principle of non-injury, what we call today and in India, ahimsa. The program itself is a different related term called ahimsa, or in Sanskrit, ahimsa. This, I think, is the cardinal virtue of Ashoka's Dharma, and possibly the foundational virtue that he talks about. He talked about ahimsa much more than any other virtue as part of his Dharma philosophy. And in propagating ahimsa, he was uncompromised. He was not willing to let some local provisions trump over the virtue of ahimsa. Even in the far northwest, we have Ashoka inscriptions translated into Greek and Aramaic in Kerala, in Afghanistan, and even there, he's very adamant about the virtue of not killing again. And by extension, not engaging in war, killing human beings in the pursuit of war. His major turning point in his life was probably his major war with Kalinga, which is the area today broadly within Odisha, which is in the northeast of India. And there he had a very ferocious battle in which he said hundreds of thousands of people were killed or died or deported. This he claims to 13 rock fiction as something that he very much regrets. There's a certain sense of in the book, he was an emperor, a king, who was willing to say, I am sorry for that. And this is what brings him into the philosophy that based on non-violence and all. We need to take on that. Yeah, sure. Yeah. Let's come back to a couple of other things. Yeah.
I'll give some general remarks following what Patrick said, and then focus on his Dhamma, which I believe consists of three aspects. One which we might call inter-individual or interpersonal modalities, what individuals as private persons owe one another, or what they owe to each other as members of family or as neighbors, more generally as human beings. The second aspect is what we might call the social ethic. I don't want to use the term religion for a reason which I'll just explain. It's a social ethic which has to do with intergroup morality. Patrick has already mentioned that there were Parekh, which I take to be religious philosophical groups. Perhaps spokespersons of these groups, leaders of these groups, but certainly also other members, formal or informal members, how they must relate to each other. And a third, and this is a very significant thing, and that's what initially fascinated me in attacking Ashoka, because what wonderful things he had to say about how people with different Ashantic worldviews, how they can live together, on what basis, on what is foundation. And the third is a political ethic, both the primary, because as Patrick already pointed out, primarily a king, and the other two aspects of Dharma are subsumed under his political ethic. Dharma is for me a primarily political belief. It's a complex political belief. And the political has to do with what the ruler owes to the ruled, and what the ruled owes to the ruler. That's the primary thing. But the other bit, the intergroup, interpartner morality is important and experiential. So I'll give some background to this idea of that. And finally, I would say that there is, and not immediately, as I'm sure that it's anything but by saying what started with that they have to respond to something that I say. The thing about Ashoka, of course, is the statement that you already referred to, the 13th description about the first major anti-war statement that comes anywhere in the world, right? Which is and the full transformation in the very idea of kingship. Kingship was based, as chieftains were based, on a very strong hyper-masculine warrior ethic. And Ashoka, which is transformed radically. He's a supreme monarch. He rests all authority in himself. So don't confuse me. I'm not sure. I don't want to read anachronistically anything back to Ashoka. He's not Republican in his thinking, although there were little republics before his time. He's not obviously a Democrat. It's a very modern idea. If it was an ancient idea, it could always do negatively as the joy of based. Nobody ever thought about including everybody in the polity in the ancient period or the medieval period. So there's no question. Any thinker, no matter how great he is or she is, there's no question of him being the Democrat or so he's a monarchical, he's an authoritarian ruler in some ways. He's authoritative, his commands are final. But despite all that, the content of what we have, the reception of Dharma proposed, that is really quite outstanding. And there is much that we can learn from. And this pacifism, I mean, that's a very strong term, but his anti-war thing, his challenge to the warrior ethic, is something which is less emphasized that in some of the remarks that I'm going to make. I'll hand over to Patrick, but before that, I'll just sort of add to some of the things that he said. Ashoka is living at a time which are quite turbulent. There are major transformations that are taking place. This is every historian, many of them probably are, some of them at least are here with me, and this is a very simplistic way of saying that, to come to students, just a little background. This is a period where there is a transition taking place from the past to the economic economy to a slightly more monetized economy, for tax place. There is more stuff that we produce, and there are new opportunities being opened up by to trade, and that also means urbanization. That in cities, you have to live with people with all kinds of needs. In small villages or in Children, you could have more homogeneous food, but in cities, there is greater heterogeneity, different, and there were in the past different. There were people with each other who previous. So that becomes pretty important in the centers. There is also a big temptation to be hedonistic, to have wealth being generated, fractions are there, not only for consumption, but also, there are popular, there are and drink, and there are festive occasions of various kinds, and these changes and those that get past as well, new forms of these come in, and there are new anxieties as a result of this. Some people are benefiting from it, and some people are losing out. People who left their villages or come to the cities, not everybody benefits from the new wealth that is created. Some lost out, and there is new anxiety, and people are looking for something new. There is not such. They can't live with a worldview which is already fully synthesized or explored. We are looking for new paths of ethical fulfillment. There's another very important thing that takes place at this time, is a concern among these people who are anxious and looking for new problems. There is no focus on new security, and so people are looking for ways of thinking, of worldview, which will explain to them why they are facing these new problems and these new insecurities, why they're facing them. And so there's a focus on not just on this worldly life, but on what happens when you are dead, the afterlife. You concern with the afterlife. And you must remember that in the Vedic world, there is no idea of Dharma, there is no idea of rebirth. In the very early Vedic worldview, I'm talking about the second millennium before the era. I mean, it's probably true that I could put it another right that one life, the born and the die, and that's it. I mean, the hope that they can go forward is, after they die, they dwell in some swarga, but immortality itself is just a much longer life. And the idea of swarga is just a consummation of another, this life in another loka. It's not politically fully emotional. So all these things about what's going to happen to me, what is the stable world, how am I going to be placed in this new transition that is taking place? These are questions about self and about the world, put ourselves in different ways, and there are many new philosophies apart from very philosophy, very private, very which both are ready to classify, which gives entirely to classify. New philosophies are being shape around them are the Vikas, then the Vikas, and both of those, and Buddhists have a very prominent role to play in the formation of Prabhupada's worldview. Even though that I would agree about the so other Namalan, Prabhupada is not a Buddhist king, he's a Buddhist. He's what was in one part of his life, he comes to his rule, political rule because so what else? And stop here. I will come back. But one last thing I would say is that when you are faced with different and people who challenge you, you begin to doubt your own view. One of the reasons that you cope with this new challenge of circular, even more. This is part of the academic doing that you other than right. And this is one of the features of modern religions, not modern religions in general, that you demarcate yourself sharply from each other. You see yourself as extremely different from the other. Try to radically otherize the other, and there is a new possibility. There's a possibility of new conflicts as a result of this. And these are features of religion. I would say religion, if they have a heart. And Ashoka is aware of this, that there is a possibility that conflict. But there is a possibility that there are these formation of religion that unfold. Anyone to arrest in Dharma is one of the first attempts to arrest possibility of the hardening of religion to the world. Of the basic Christ. And I would say one of the very central things of the Dharma is to prevent it which even though his own attempt failed, this became very important and slipped into and became very important part of the modern imaginary concept. And this is the last thing about. And it keeps appearing again and again. Every time that that's too hard, I feel something and we come back to be formed the privilege for it. I return.
Thank you, Rajeev. Take that cursor off my head. I'd like to lose it.
एक लगा हुआ है प्राकृतिक के पर वो कर्टर लगाना कष्ट बता देना है.
Okay, that's better. Thank you. Yeah. So, I talked about him being Buddhist, but turning to something other than Buddhism in order to the book I tried to create this over a period of about a year. He says that when he wrote this first inscription, he has been pastor in But for a year, it was not very zealous. But when he visited the Buddhist Sangha, but I tried to trace this. I think he had his coming the war was probably sometime in a year. Forget about the year because anyway, after the October. And then he goes on, likelihood after that October war, but that is when most Indian wars happened, the month of March, he goes sometime in December, January, I think, to see the Sangha. This is the time when he had this crisis of conscience of all the atrocities that he had committed, or his soldiers had committed. And then he became a devout Buddhist. And the next year, for 8 months, he's on a travel, imitating the life of a Buddhist monk who is supposed to travel during 8 months and remain in one place during 4 months of the rainy season. He goes on the 8 month, and then at the end of it, he writes his first, what we call the minor inscription, where he proclaims that he is a Buddhist, that he had gone on this tour. And then he said, and he encourages his people to be zealous in following the path that it seems already that they presently tell them to be zealous on the path of Buddhism. And then 2 years later, 12 years after his consultation as king, he gives the starts writing the major of where Buddhism finds no faith and becomes done. So I'm sort of imagining that the king, that is poor, went back home, looked his capital, Pataliputra, and there was what we would call today an intervention. An intervention by some people. You might say, hey, king, your majesty, you can't do this. Right? You can't be a Buddhist and govern this land. Or else he had second thought that he was thinking of having a project that is much larger than him. Moral philosophy that is more universal than him. In any case, he pivots from being a Buddhist to being a moral philosopher. And that's when his thinking becomes more sharp with regard to what Dharma means. And he defines what Dharma is, the components of Dharma, in several of his inscriptions. And to give the reader tip of what I think is Ashoka's moral philosophy, that I think, and as Rajeev just mentioned, is a relational ethic, an ethic that seeks to make the relationship of the self, me, for example, as I enter into relationship with significant other. So I have given a little diagram. I see you can't see this. So take one picture of my book, right? Something like this here. But I describe it very good. It is a pentagon with 5 facets, with self in the middle, with a circle, right? And it has then lines going from the self to each of these 5 sides of the pentagon. Okay. There are people who are above you, who are superior to you, and Ashoka identifies them as elders, the aged, and in a special way, mother and father. To them, your relationship is one of obedience. Word is Shruta. It means to listen to. On the left, you find people who are superior, yet different. They are religious people, and then come on. And these are Brahmanas and Brahmanas, who are the 2 kinds of religious people. To him, he said, what is the self relationship? Giving them gifts. Giving them gifts especially food. Most commoners need food. On the right side, I say there are people who are more or less your equals, companions, friends, acquaintances, and relatives. To them, it's proper respect. That's translation of a rather difficult to understand Prakrit Sanskrit concept called Sang Pratibha. To treat them with proper. And below you, there are two kinds of relationships. One is to slaves and servants. You must realize that Ashoka comes from a very inegalitarian society. There was part of what Ashoka society was. There were slaves and there were servants. Servant class called Kritaka. Servants called. And today he says again proper respect. In other words, you have a proper relationship to them. And on the left-hand side, you have people who are non-human beings to whom you have connections, animals and other living beings. To them, you have relationship of ahimsa, of not killing. So that, in a nutshell, would be the relationship of pertaining to individuals surrounding you, your work, individual work. In the chapter of the book, I turn to something that is from the Bhargava's area, which is his ethic with regard to communities of various kinds. In other words, demographically identifiable groups who, for one reason or other, get together as in Ashoka's time, he defines them principally as Partha. But he seems to conceive of Partha not just as Buddhist and Brahmins and Ajivas and Jains, but he said there are Partha also among Greeks. So there were parallel, similar groups, which may be philosophical, which may be ethical, which may be religious, who get together. These Parthanders, therefore, formed identifiable social. The problem with that, of course, is that they come in conflict. Each trying to advance his or her own Parthander. And after that, tries to invite them to go beyond this, to go beyond their own group, to break these boundaries and barriers. The least common denominator, again, that's you say, Rajeev, is living in harmony. At least don't kill each other. Right? At least be nice to each other. At least be in some form of non-conflict. I think, and Rajeev in his writings have pointed out repeatedly, I think I invite them to do better, to do more. And that more we think we can encapsulate in the word Shushusha, we looked at earlier with regard to that. And here Shushusha has especially its etymological meaning of listening, a desire to listen. So essentially he's saying you need to learn from each other. He's asking them not only to live in harmony with others, but also to find ways in which you can communicate with, you can listen to them, and you can learn from them. This is an important point because it presupposes that no Acharya, no individual has a monopoly on truth, has a monopoly on Dharma, has a monopoly on virtue. You have to go beyond yourself to understand. And this is what he's inviting his path under. And I think if we extrapolate from the 3rd century BCE Ashokan society to modern contemporary society, we have so many part-timers here. And we all live sometimes in one, sometimes in several. If you belong to a university, you have a university person. You belong to Delhi University. Others belong to JNU, others to Ashoka. There are others. And you belong to sports department. You root for your own team, right? Beyond that, I think we belong to a national department. We are Indian, we are American, we are French, Chinese. And there are many ways in which this identity makes people within those parts come into conflict with others, not very to listen. And I think that is something that Ashoka is trying that we teach people to go beyond. And I think these can be natural, they can be political, Hindu and Muslim, Jew and Muslim, Christian, etc., where we have to go beyond our own boundaries in order to find out. He says is the term, well, he uses the term favorite of Rajeev Bhargava, he uses the term Bahu Shruta. Bahu Shruta means Bahu, as you know, many, much. Shruta is heard. So Bahu Shruta is much heard. And in Sanskrit languages, also in Hindi and other countries, they don't make a distinction between hearing and listening. The same word is used for both. So here, Shruta really means not hearing, which is a passive enterprise. I can just hear a bird sing there, but an active listening and listening to and absorbing what others are saying. And I think you cannot be a Bahu Shruta by only listening to yourself or to your people. You become Bahu Shruta by going beyond yourself to find the other heart. So that's an important message, even though Ashoka is not speaking to contemporary people. But I think there is a lesson in that from a person who lived in a very, very different time. And this is what I say in the beginning of the book. If there was one person with whom I'd like to meet, with whom I would like to have a drink, sit down and talk, that would be Ashoka. Because he thought outside the box, as we say. He said and did things quite remarkable, quite unusual for the time to be. Kings were supposed to be warriors, be fearless in battle, to conquer others. And that was a warrior ethic. And he subverts that. Which is easy for us from this vantage point to say, wow, okay, this is that. But it was quite a radical march. So this is, I think, what is so alluring about Ashoka, that writing book was a letter actually to me during the pandemic isolation. So let you continue.
I also divide what I would say to what I call social ethic and then talk about the political ethic. And really, this fragment of my talk, I will focus on the social. I want to give you a background. I said that there were differences in the city, within the city, other different. Let's just remember, and this is of course confined as anybody. Let's say there is the Vedic culture, a lot of people, I mean, Broncos, a very famous scholar who had argued that Ashoka, who was living in Patliputra, was in what is called the Greater Bhagat, and both Buddhism and Jainism and the Upanishads were in this area. Ashoka evolved this in this area. And this was an area where Brahmanism, Vedic Brahmanism was not that dominant. But my view is that by at least the time that Ashoka lived, Vedic Brahmanism has become not dominant, but at least one important landscape. What is important in Vedic Brahmanism? Most important
thing, of course, as I mentioned, was ritual sacrifice. So there are people who are extremely this worldly oriented, the chieftains and the rich householders. They want these worldly goods. They want more territory. They want more cattle. They want horses. They want treasure. They want a healthy life. They want to be free from disease. They want a long life. Perhaps they even desire, whatever they think is immortality. And they want sons, because sons are extremely important for their perpetuity, the perpetuity of the lineage. And these are things that they desire. And the general belief is among these people that if they perform a sacrifice to Agni, then they will somehow be able to procure these goods. They cannot, of course, do all this by themselves. They have to enter into some kind of a transactional relationship with another group, namely the Brahmins, who actually physically perform the sacrifice. So the Yajamans are the beneficiaries of the sacrifice, but the Brahmins, the ritual specialists, they are the ones who do all this, and they recite hymns and they have to recite it meticulously, extremely well, if the sacrifice is to be successful, if it yields what it is meant to yield. And there is also, at least in very large parts of the Vedic world, there's a belief that there are these gods and these gods who are not transcendent gods like there are in the Abrahamic traditions, very much like the Greco-Roman gods who come in and out of the world. These are also gods. They have some higher status than humans, but they are around, and there are malignant gods and there are benevolent gods. The benevolent gods have to be on your side if you have to secure whatever it is that you wish to secure. And the malevolent gods, who are creating all kinds of obstructions to the realization of your wishes and your desires, they have to be somehow appeased. They have to be told to back off and not to interfere too much in the realization of whatever it is that they wish to realize. So these gods have to be appeased. And when you sacrifice something, say an animal, the smoke, the aroma and the smoke that arises is consumed by the gods and maybe some goddesses. And what is left behind is the cooked meat, really. That has to be shared between the Brahmins and the Rajanyas, and the rest of the Jhutan, if I may use a word, is to be distributed to the rest of society, the people, the Vish. Anyway, this is generally so. Ritual sacrifice is extremely important. There are these gods and goddesses are important. The role of Brahman is very important, and there is no idea that there is another world. There's no duplication of the world as would exist in the Abrahamic traditions, but also in certainly the Abrahamic traditions. And there is no idea yet about a rebirth. certainly no idea about rebirth being linked to karma and to good action or bad action. This is something that happens with the arrival of Buddha and maybe some of his predecessors. Maybe this idea is present. I mean, here's a great specialist on the Upanishads, and maybe we can ask him this question, whether some of this, what Gananath Upanishads calls ethicization of rebirth, whether that is something that happens in the Upanishad. But anyway, this is, in the Vedic worldview, this is not present. Well, this is one. And there are a lot of people who are getting disaffected by the elaborate ceremonies that are being performed, the number of Brahmins, and the festivities that accompany the ritual slaughter. They're also a little disgusted by the fact that animals have to be slaughtered, particularly the pastoralists, because the animals that are slaughtered are pashus, they're domestic animals. And many of these domestic animals are taken away from agriculturalists and from pastoralists, and they're not very happy about it. Anyway, there is some disaffection that has already arisen with this whole business of Vedic sacrifice. Even Brahmins themselves are upset about the kind of luxury, conspicuous consumption that is going around. They think that the whole point about ritual sacrifice being lost in the festivities and the conspicuous consumption that is taking around these ritual sacrifices. Well, so there is this internal conflict within the early Vedic world, but there are more stronger conflicts that are emerging, where people are turning away from the world. Instead of being immersed in the world, instead of being this worldly, they're turning away from the world. They're beginning to feel not at home. They're feeling like exiles in this world. And there's already a tradition much earlier, as G.C. Pandey have mentioned earlier, and many other people have talked about two different forms of asceticism, two different forms of kind of renunciation. I'm sure Parekh also has much to say about this. But anyway, there are a number of people who are turning away from the world. And I would say that there are three of these which are extremely important, at least in Ashoka's times, and if not earlier. There must be many more. But as Parekh mentioned, Ajivikas, the Nirgranthis, the Jains, and the Buddhists. Now, I think what is common to the Ajivikas, the Nirgranthis, and the Vedic Brahmins, despite massive differences over their this-worldly and non-this-worldly orientation, what is common is that they are focused on their self. They're looking for self-fulfillment, something like what's going to happen, how am I going to achieve something in this world? Or what is going to happen to me how am I going to get emancipation from this world, which is full of all evil, and all these three, Ajivikas give a very fatalistic answer. There's nothing that you can do about it. It'll all come, but after many, many births, you cannot, maybe a fixed number of births. Or the Jains have a completely different view. They think that the more austere you are, the more ascetic you become, the more world denier you are, the more you cease to act, both physically and mentally, and achieve a certain motionlessness, stillness. The more you are, the more you curb the possibility of acquiring demerit, because to act is to acquire demerit. And so you have to stop acting. And over a period of time, when the net demerit in your balance sheet is zero, you will have achieved liberation. I think Buddha is the one person, or Buddha is one person who takes the focus away from yourself. It's not as if self is not important. Self-fulfillment is not important. Self-realization is not important. There is a fantastic ethic of self-fulfillment, but what we might call the moral aspect of human existence. What do you do to others? Good deed to others becomes an integral part of merit and demerit. In other words, your moral account is not just dependent on what you're doing to yourself, to your body or to your mind, how much discipline how you're disciplining your mind and your body and so on. And whether you're achieving it through knowledge or through some other exercise, spiritual exercise, how you deal with others is extremely important. So interpersonal relations become very important. And that is where I'd like to, this is from Parek's new translations. See, you can see this is the kind of broader Buddhist influence on Ashoka. See, so it's always, as he said, relational. See, and this is a very important aspect of the moral dimension of the broader ethics. Obedience to mother and father. How do you relate to your mother and your father? Or to your elders? It's not in this one. This Rock Edict 3 doesn't mention elders, but the other edicts do. Giving gifts to, how do you deal with your friends? To companions, to your acquaintances, and to your relatives, to your natis. How do you deal with the Brahmins and the Shamanas? You as a self, as a person, as Parek's diagram showed, self with, how do you deal with? Do you honor them? Do you donate something to them? And not killing living beings. It's not just restricted to not killing other human beings. It's not killing all jivas. So it's not just a morality with other related morality, which is restricted to other humans, but it's also encompassing animals, to all jiva. And it's also spending little and accumulating little. And some of us who were meeting yesterday, Parekh, of course, included, a lot of us felt that this can also be another related thing, because the basis of your generosity, you cannot do anything for others. You cannot take care of others. You cannot look after others if you're spending all the money on yourself. And if you're only accumulating all the wealth for yourself, you have to, if you need to help others, the anath, those who have nobody to take care of them, or those who are destitute, those who are serving you, if you really need to care of themselves, you should not just be a spendthrift, and you should not only be saving things for yourself, for your own future. You should be able to give to others. And so this is also spending little and accumulating little is linked to the virtue of generosity, which is something which is fundamentally other related. So the Buddhist ideas of moral aspect of your ethics, broader ethics, which is inter-individual, that's extremely important. And that's one particular aspect of Buddha, Dhamma, that is very much a part of Ashoka's Dhamma, but which I would say, and I'm sure Parekh would agree, is a more general idea. It's something which is there in Buddha, and it's part of the greater Magadha environment. This is there in Jains, not killing others, and not killing animals, not injuring animals, not spending too much, not accumulating much. I'm sure they must also be talking about obedience to mother and father and so on. So this is a kind of a more general. Now, what is so specific about Ashoka is that he realizes that the Ajivikas, the Jains, the Buddhists, and the Vedic Brahmins, they all are very, very different from each other. In fact, arguably, some of the biggest intellectual battles took place between the Ajivikas and the Buddhists, intellectual battles, even more than the Vedic Brahmins, who the differences between the Buddhists and these Vedic Brahmins must be the greatest. Nonetheless, the really fierce battles took place within the Shramanic movement between the Ajivikas and Buddhists. And in this, Ashoka could realize that this is a troubling feature. These are rigid and hardening identities, possibility of groups instead of being loosely structured, very loose, fellowships becoming into rigidly compartmentalized groups, which I call religionization. So he is looking for how to prevent this from happening. As a ruler, he feels this is a responsibility, not only for peace, but also for harmony, as Patrick mentioned. And in the seventh edict, he says the following. He says, well, there are many ways in which I can deal with it. I'm kind of being a little, what should I say, less economical in the sense that I'm trying to be a little more imaginative here, maybe more speculative. And Patrick can correct me if I'm wrong. He's the textualist here. But I mean, he let's say the king is thinking, well, one way I can solve this problem is to tell them to live separately from each other. So let one group stay in one region, other group stay in another region. That's one way of solving the problem. And Ashoka says, no, I don't want that to happen. The second way is that they can all live together, but with rules of coexistence, which don't actually allow them to live face to face. So they are living what my friend Sudipta Kaviraj has called back-to-back neighborliness or back-to-back existence. So people can just be, this is let live of the modern urban societies. That I don't know what you're doing, I don't care what you're doing, I'm indifferent to you, you are indifferent to me. This is toleration of a certain kind. I don't think Ashoka is happy with that. He said, if you're living together, if you're living in the same place, I want all Pashandas to live everywhere in the kingdom in the same place. That's what he says. That's how the seventh edict begins. So they must live face to face. But then the major question arises, what can be the common foundation of people living face to face? How can people live face to face when they are so different from each other? When they are so deeply opposed to each other in some ways? When they can actually, if they were to, if verbal battles, which could be at that time very, very intense, they can be, word wars. So how can they live together without really engaging in verbal duels and word wars? And he says there are two things which are common in all Pashandas. One is Sanyama, is taught by everybody. And there's also Bhava Shuddhi. And I interpret Bhava Shuddhi as not just, purity of mind, which is to say cleansing your mind of all the kind of wrong things or the false ideas that emerge in you, but also ill will towards others, getting rid of them, because they affect you, but they are things that affect others, which actually affect you. They spoil your character. So how do you create Bhava Shuddhi in yourself? And then he specifies what Sayam, Bhava Shuddhi, apne bhav ki shuddhi hai. And then he says, in his later edicts, he specifies what Sanyama means, particularly in relation to intergroup, interpashandic conflicts, verbal disputes. And he says, here, what is extremely important is vachagutti. It's restraint of speech, which I've translated in some of my work as artful management of the tongue. You have to carefully, artful management of the tongue. Vachagutti. It's gupt. It's basically, you have to, Vach, your speech, somehow you must know when to hide, not to control your speech. Usko gupt kar dena, and when to let it come out. So restraint on speech is how it's generally, but what I've also called it artful management of the tongue. So So Vach-Gutti is, and that he says is the foundation of a common ethic among all the Pashandas. And he specifies it. And here again, Patrick should tell me if I've gone overboard or overstepped the textual evidence. But this is how at least I see it, that when you dislike or when you differ with somebody, those things that you differ with, you might dislike. But don't keep it to yourself. Don't privatize your hatred for the other. Bring it out. Boldo, face to face. But when you say it to the other, do it only on 3 conditions. We do it when 3 conditions are met. First, say to the other that he's wrong if you have a good reason to. And this is where I'm most vulnerable. I think in some of the translations, it uses the word karana, and which is how I translate it as reason. But maybe Patrick should tell me if I'm wrong here, and because I'll immediately write something and make it more consistent with what Patrick says. So good reason. And even if you have a good reason, do it only on appropriate occasions, not on any occasion. You just can't be critical of the other, criticize the other, find faults in others on any occasion that you feel. It has to be inappropriate. And even when the occasion is appropriate, do it moderately, never immoderately. But he doesn't stop there. He says, if you like something, if you have a preferred philosophical viewpoint, if you have an adherence to a Pashanda, then you will invariably want to talk about the good things about your Pashandic worldview. But when you say that, no, don't keep it to yourself. Don't hold back. Say it to the other that, this is something good about your Pashandic worldview. But again, do it on 3 conditions. Do it only when you have good reason to. Not any reason, not on any, just anything. Keep saying that, "Are, ye bhi acha hai, wo bhi acha hai, sab kuch acha hai mera." And do it on appropriate occasions. Every occasion is not an occasion to beat your own drum. And even when you have good occasion, do it do it moderately, never immoderately. I'm the greatest. मैं ही सब कुछ हूं, मैंने ही सब कुछ किया है, ये नहीं. So these two are both important because either way you are belittling the other Pashanda and also belittling yourself. This is extremely important, how the self and the other are intertwined here. And then he says, well, okay, but what's the point of talking to each other? And this is where, again, I come back to what Patrick said. It's very clear in his inscriptions. The reason is that we all want to grow. And we want Dhamma to grow. We want, and that growth is a need because you are not perfect. The fact that you still need to grow means that you haven't achieved that level of perfection, right? Which you can possibly do, whether it is in virtue or in truth or whatever it is that you are seeking. You haven't got it. So none of us have got it. All of us are imperfect. And it's only by talking to one another, by learning from one another. And you cannot learn from one another unless you listen to one another. So unless you listen to one another and listen to what the other person is to say about the faults in your and the good things in his, and likewise you saying what is good about you and what is bad about you, unless this discourse takes place, mutual learning, mutual listening is a must for mutual learning, and mutual learning is absolutely necessary for mutual growth. And he says that is the growth of his Dhamma. The growth of the Dhamma of every Pashanda is the Vadhi. He called it Sarva Pashanda with Vadhi. Atma Pashanda Vadhi, Par Pashanda Vadhi, and Sarva Pashanda Vadhi, and the growth of Dhamma itself. And that is possible if all of us try to become, and Patrick has already mentioned that, Bahusruta, which is a word that I absolutely adore. I mean, apart from Vachgutti. Bahusruta is listening to the many. This is, don't forget that this is a massively oral culture where people don't read each other, people listen to one another. There are actual face-to-face encounters. And we learn from listening to one another. And you listen to the many and you become Bahusruta. And all of us must strive to become Bahusruta, because that's the only way to open your mind and for you to grow, and for each of us worldview to grow, and for Ashoka's Dhamma to grow and become deeper, and So I think this is, as Patrick pointed out, this is one of the things that really, really is inspirational for any time, not just for his time. It's fantastic that he said it all in the 3rd century, but this is something which is extremely important for our times. I think it makes him a thinker who is going to be relevant for every era, for every age. I think he redefines the notion of what it is to be modern, because we associate many of these things with modernity. This is happening in the 3rd century BC. We should question the whole idea of the modern, as something which is, the whole modern tradition thing is collapses when you come up with something as breathtakingly innovative as what Ashoka has to say on this. This sounds like, when I was reading it for the first time, way back in 2009, I'd just read Political Liberalism by John Rawls. And I felt, my God, I mean, this whole idea of common foundation. And so this is a very ancient, I mean, the word is not the right word, liberal. We have to look for some other word. But this is an ancient political liberalism, which doesn't exist before Ashoka, which Ashoka has founded it. I'll come to his political ethic later. I've spoken enough. I think it's time for Patrick to take over.
Well, I'm not sure about that because it's almost 4 o'clock. Are there any questions? The person is not there, right?
Hi, Shankar.
Yeah, go ahead.
Just
Go
take
ahead.
the mic, the Shankar Ramaswamy.
Yeah, Rankar. Yeah, go ahead, Shankar. Okay. That's perfectly right. That's perfectly right. So he lived in a hierarchical world, and he, as far as I can see, does not question that hierarchical world. And have a section there about gender. He does not question gender inequalities either. In fact, women appear very infrequently in Ashokan inscriptions. most of the time as a mother in the respect, and a few times about Buddhist nuns, and about a queen of his. There's nothing said about women. So yeah, the proper respect, it's a translation. Translations are always inadequate, as you know. The word that is translated is sang pratipatti. Some is often, commentators gloss some as samyak, well, proper. Pratipatti is behavior. So behavior that is proper, that is acceptable. So in a sense, keeping to behavior to a acceptable standard. Now, interesting, the term sang pratipatti, even though I in my chart uses it with regard to only two groups, that's the equals, the relatives, friends, acquaintances, and servants and servants and slaves. Occasionally, it is used with regard to others too. For example, with regard to brahmanas and shramanas, also with regard to parents. So it's a very, very common and broad statement of a proper attitude towards various people. Now, with regard to animals and ahimsa, I think the word ahimsa is not used by Ashoka ever. It is, the word used is vihisa, vihisa or avihisa, not cruelty. So in Sanskrit, it will be vihingsa and avihingsa. That will be the Sanskrit equivalent of that. But I don't think it means anything very different. The term, I think, applies in Ashoka broadly with regard to all living beings, which would include humans. But with regard to animals, the animal kingdom, it becomes, I think, more specific in the sense that that is where humans often exhibit cruelty and killing. So with regard to both sacrificial killing, killing in religious rituals, and killing for purposes of food. He says, for example, in Rock Edict 1, that at the time of writing, there were 2 peacocks and 1 game animal or deer killed every day in his own kitchen, right? So there was visa. So that's why I think that is important. I just want to ask a person there, who's the tech person. Can we get also some questions from participants outside or not? I saw something coming. Kumkum Roy wanted to ask something, I think. Right. Okay, that's good. Okay, thank you. Thank you. They can write on the. Can we tell them that anybody who wants to ask a question can write from the participants online? Yeah. Thank you. Yeah. Yeah. Go ahead. Wait a minute. It's over here. Can you pass the? This? Shankar. Oh, there's one there. Okay.
It will come. Introduce yourself.
Maybe I'm looking for PhD sometime from the JT.
Is it working?
I mean,
Okay.
yeah.
I'm Nitin.
Yeah.
Sir, I work for JK paper, but I'm very much interested in.
Okay, go ahead.
So my question is like, sir, we are talking about the Brahminical culture. So there is concept of Vad and Samvad, and how it is related to Bahushruta, or how it is different.
Okay. So the Sangvada is conversation, Sangvad, right? Talking in conversation, dialogue. You find that in the Mahabharata all the time, right? Sangvada of this person and that person, that they're talking to each other. So that's very clear that we have that. Vada, on the other hand, has developed the meaning of debate, of confrontation. It is not directly related to Bahushruta, but Bahushruta has that concept of talking across boundaries to other people. So that becomes a Sangvada, in a sense, right? It does, right? Bahushruta is a common term in Sanskrit. It's found in Brahmanical Sanskrit, Shastric Sanskrit. Bahushruta is a person who is learned. Just you normally translate as a learned person. But Ashoka uses it with some knowledge of the etymology of it by saying you need to listen to others rather than yourself. So it has that capacity to break boundaries. I think that's the main thing there. Yeah. You want to ask a question? Yeah, please. Can you pass that? Yeah. Yeah. Mm, yeah. 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 Working. I don't know. Anyway,
So shall I repeat, sir?
no, it's go ahead. Yeah.
So this is my point, sir, because I'm just
Let me answer that. Let me answer that before we go to the second one, because I forget. I'm too old, you know that, and I forget. The what you said is correct, but the term dharma has a wide spectrum of meanings. So you cannot reduce dharma to a single univocal meaning. So it has a multiplicity of meanings. It is contextual and depending on who is speaking. Dharma is a contested term, especially during its early period that we are talking about. So Dharma was contested and appropriated by the Buddhists to talk about the Buddha's Dharma, right? It was appropriated and defined by Ashoka. It will be later appropriated and defined by the Brahmanical community. So it has a wide spectrum of meanings. So when you say that dharma can go against morality, then you are saying that a particular dharma as defined by a particular person can go against a particular moral philosophy proposed by somebody else. Yes, of course it can, right? But it is not dharma versus moral philosophy in that abstract sense, right? It's a particular dharma as defined by a particular group of people saying, you go against dharma, when they actually mean is you go against my dharma, right? So it is easy for somebody to say, many people will say you against dharma, right? When they actually mean is that you against what I consider is dharma, right? Because what you consider dharma will be quite different, right? So that's, I think, one thing that you need to consider. Second point. Yes, you have a second. That's it? Okay, yeah.
Just one, okay, so yes, sir. I got it, sir. That is generally we say morality has two different phases, sir. Religious morality, or we can say conventional or traditional.
Mhm.
And in most of the religion, they follow this one.
Sure.
And you mentioned that is, I understand, sir, that is, you are mentioning reflective morality or rational morality.
Not reflective. I talked about relational morality.
Relational.
Relational morality, not
rational, yes, yes.
in relation. Yeah.
Sir, relational, okay,
Yeah.
relational, okay,
Yeah.
okay, fine, sir.
Yeah. Okay.
Okay, yes, thank you.
Okay, let's, there's one new person coming. I'll come to you in a minute. Yeah.
Hi, my name is Ashutosh. I'm an undergraduate student. I'm studying political sciences right now.
Where?
Khalsa College.
Okay. All questions make sense. Non-duality, cruelty. Okay, non-cruelty. Yeah, yeah. Right. Right. You are talking about what Ashoka says, not what I say. Okay, good. Right. Okay. Ashoka does not speak about karma or rebirth. He's silent on that, right? That whole thing does not exist. Oh, thank you. So, with regard to his own use of that, yes, he says that if you do certain things in this life, you will have a better afterlife. He uses, heaven, swarga, right? So that was his main, one of the main purposes of living a moral life is to have happiness, sukha, in this world. You'll be happy in this world, but you'll be happy in the next world. So that is, I think, what he's talking about. And the next world, Parekh, here he talked about what happens after you die, is quite important. And so non-cruelty, although he does not use the term cruel, he uses the Ivisa, is not killing, is important for him. The word, Sanskrit word that he uses in Prakrit form is alab, alabate, right? Holding some, seizing an animal, which came to mean killing, is what he's going against here. And of course, he goes against war, which also includes killing, so which is in the human world. Yeah. So I think it's with regard to not so much of the ideology of karma and rebirth. We do not know whether he knew that or whether he subscribed to that. If he knew it, he doesn't speak at it. He's completely silent on that. Yeah. Are there any? Okay, there's one coming. Okay, let me take Kumkum's there for a minute. Can you read that? I can't.
Yeah, I'll read it.
Yeah.
Kumkum says, many thanks for a fascinating discussion. I was wondering whether you would like to share a bit more about the ritual practices of women, which Ashoka condemns in the 9th Rock Edict. Would these have been non-Vedic? And how would these tie in with the identities of the Pashandas?
Right.
Patrick.
Thank you, Kumkum. It's a good question. We talked earlier about women, right? And when he talks about women a couple of times, not in a good way, right? It's in the edicts. So he talks about how what he describes as mangala are frivolous. He doesn't say they're bad, but they're frivolous. They're useless. You should not spend time and money on it, right? What are these mangalas? Mangalas are generally, he says, what people do when a son is born, when a child gets married, when a person goes on a journey, people perform rituals. these are not Vedic rituals. No, these are generally rituals. I would not call it folk or call it general. And this is what, and he says, and then he says, at these times, especially women folk do a lot of these Mangala rituals, which are apala, without fruit. They're fruitless, right? And he said, what you should do instead is what he calls, in coining a new word, Dharma Mangala. There's a Mangala with regard to Dharma. And he talks about how to practice Dharma in your life. That he thinks about as Mangala. And I don't think that is one other thing I want to say. My friend, I'm sure Kunkum, you know him too, Tim Lubin, has written quite a good article about Mangala in the Griya Sutras. What we find in the Griya Sutras, or Brahmanical Griya Sutras, seem to be a codification of these kinds of common practices that are domestic in nature and that are also called Mangala in the so I think Tim has a point there. With regard to their connection to the Pasandas, I don't see any, at least in the Ashokan inscriptions, they're not said to be connected to any Pasanda as such, but these were the things that were done by ordinary people in the ordinary circumstances of their lives. I mean, you can think of today in India, what happens when a person gets married. It's huge number of various things you do, right? They may be ritual, they may be custom, but they do that. When a child is born, similarly. So I think Ashoka is a bit of an elitist. He likes elite religion, the Pashandic religion. He dismisses common religion. And in fact, in the very first rock edict, he talks about people who kill animals during rituals, and especially during gatherings he calls samaja. Samajas are normally practiced by ordinary people who have these annual or semi-annual gatherings for a variety of purposes. And in that, they do a variety of things, including a ritual offering of animals. So he has that attitude, I think. Yeah.
Can I come in
Yeah,
here? Hi, Kumkum. Thanks for that question. I have I wouldn't say a different view, but I have a slightly a different gloss on this. I think the basic structure of the Vedic high elite Vedic ritual, basic structure and of that elite ritual and of popular rituals of the kind that Ashoka talks about in the 9th edict is the same. In the Vedic ritual where you perform sacrifice of something very valuable, particularly animals, high Vedic rituals, that's also for some fruit. You must get this, I must be able to get this, I must be able to get that. Some sons or treasure or territory. And that's exactly what is happening at a popular level, except that you probably don't have the money to perform an animal sacrifice, or you don't have you cannot get, the high class Brahmins, you can not afford to give them dakshina. It's something, maybe Brahmins are not even involved in that, or maybe they are. I have no idea, and it is not mentioned but the basic structure is the same. And he is coming, he has a kind of a reconciliatory attitude to the idea of a ritual, sacrificial ritual. So he's against animal sacrifice. He's against what we might call bloodletting, although Patrick rightly pointed out that in the Vedic sacrifice, killing has very little blood, because
That's blood, but
it has blood, but
later on.
But later on, not
Killing
the
is by suffocation.
killing is by suffocation, And then, of course, the animal is butchered, and everything is, all the parts of the animals which are eaten are distributed and so on. So obviously there's blood, but those are things that don't happen, and women don't get involved in any of that in any case. But the rituals are the same, and he says that, well, these kind of rituals, which do not involve any major high expense or animal sacrifice, these are fine. You can have them, but the elitist attitude is that these are pretty pointless. Nothing is going to come out of it. If you really want to get the good results here in this world or in some other world, Swarga, it's not specified. I don't think Ashoka also believes in some other world, in a sense that some qualitatively different world. But either way, these rituals will not help. So while he's tolerant of these other rituals, which do not involve animal sacrifice and which do not involve great dakshinas to Brahmins and so on. But he is against some kind of rituals which are expensive and particularly which involve the slaughter of animals and sacrifice of animals. He in first edict, he bans them. So that is something which directly hits a certain class of Brahmins who have every reason to be a little upset by what he's done. But overall, he doesn't sort of dismiss the idea of ritual altogether. He doesn't say, this is all. This is one of the things that people do, and even the Brahminical, Vedic Brahminic Pashandas, if they carry on their rituals without suffocating animals, I mean, those are fine, I would imagine. So I think this basically, he's prepared to honor Brahmins and Shamanas, both, and equally, Shamanas and Brahmanas, both are, he wants people to be courteous to both, and he wants he himself to honor both, but he doesn't want to. He's obviously he's taken away that privilege from those Brahmins who were earning a lot of money by performing elaborate and complex animal ritual sacrifices, and so he hits them, but he doesn't dismiss them altogether. He wants to treat them like any other Pashanda. So it's in a sense, I would say equal is not a word, but it's honoring all. Those Brahmins who perform rituals, he's fine with them. Even, and this is an answer to, indirectly to Kumkum, that women performing these rituals, he's tolerant of. And if these women happen to be performing with their husbands in even elite circles, he would be fine as long as there is no animal sacrifice there.
Yeah, only thing I would add is that one has to take seriously the term Mangala that is used here. It is a technical term, which refers to a particular kind of ritual that has nothing to do with Vedic ritual or animal sacrifice. These are things that are done in-house, within the home. Animal sacrifices are not done in the home. And that's why they are incorporated in the later Griya Sutras. Griya Sutras are Griya, right? It's a thing done at home. So these things are generally a home thing. And of course, there are the other Vedic rituals, what we normally call Shrauta rituals, which are performed, as you said, with a lot of killing.
But one thing which is common to both,
trying to get a reward.
Yes.
Yes, absolutely. Yes. All these things that have a reward. All of them have a reward, of course.
It's not that you will. It's not good action on your part.
Yeah.
Which is going to get you reward. It's performing a ritual.
Yeah, but that is common also to Ashoka. Yes.
But
if you look in the Mangala thing, he says with the Dharma Mangala, you doing the normal Mangala, you may or may not get a reward. But doing the Dharma Mangala, you are get a reward in this world, and you are bound to get a reward in the next world.
Yes, but it's a dharma by its very kind of definition is other related. The moral dimension of dharma is extremely important.
Right,
whereas
but you get
in the others.
Right.
It's all to do with I must get a son. I must
grant.
Which is what happens today. I mean, it's I want to get a good husband. Let me go to Santoshima. I want to pass the exams. Let me perform this little ritual. Here, the focus is entirely on all these other things. So Dhamma Mangala is some ceremony, but which must have this very important moral dimension, which is proper regard to slaves and servants, reverence to elders, self-restraint with respect to living beings, giving gifts to Shamanas and Brahmins. I mean, all of that is going to get you fruit.
You get the fruit.
But not these other things which you can perform, but they're fruitless.
Yes, pray. You have the thing to. Can you pass that across? Okay. It will be pressed. How that is.
Thank you, Professor.
You're welcome.
Parekh and Rajeev. I am Nishok. I am a PhD student at IIT Delhi. I study philosophy. I'm working on environmental philosophy. I have a question, one for each of you. First, to you, I want to take off from what Shankar was saying about non-cruelty. And I couldn't help but wonder that, violence, probably in any society, but particularly in ancient society, wasn't just directed towards animals, right? But there was also immense violence probably within human communities and especially between higher and lower classes.
Right.
I don't know the exact status of the caste order back in the day, but whatever it may be, I'm sure there would have been a lot of violence even within human communities. So, it seems like just the fact of proper respect, which I take to be like a positive morality, seems inadequate when it's not also juxtaposed with some kind of negative morality, which is non-cruelty or like non-harm. So why is that? So why is only non-cruelty sort of, so I see why non-cruelty is applicable to the animal world, but why it's also not present in the human world.
If I have to interpret that, I think it is present. Ahimsa for Ashoka is an umbrella, supervening concept that guides all relationships, right? That's why he's against war. When it comes to individual relationships with regard to particular groups, he's using special relationships that you have towards those groups, not using with regard to animals. There is no special relationship, right? I mean, basically, you use animals in particular way. And in using animals, you can be cruel to animals, kill animals. You use animals for food. So that's the kind of relationship that he is warning against. With regard to slaves and servants, that's the only class that comes close to what you're talking about, hierarchy, the ones who are at the bottom. He used the word sampratipatti, meaning proper respect. In that sense, I think he goes beyond the lowest common denominator. Don't be cruel to them. He's saying something that you have to do something more than that, right? Being respectful, being kind, giving them whatever. I mean, if you are a servant, giving them adequate wages. The Brita kai comes from Brita, which is wage. Giving wages. So I think it is when he's talking about dana, for example, his relationship to Brahmins and Shamanas are governed by dana, giving, right? But that's not the only thing. You have to be properly respectful towards them. You have to do a lot of other things to them. But that is the specific, most important ingredient in their relationship. I think that's what he's talking
I
about.
just add
Yeah.
something. I totally agree with Patrick. It's not equality, but I think you can say basic humanity or dignity. I think that is implicit in everything that Ashoka says. When he says you have to have Patrick has translated it as proper regard towards slaves and servants. So you have to treat them with some concern and not humiliate them, not treat them with any, not violate their dignity. Of course, they are unequal, right? Their conception of low and high is very much there. There's no mention of the caste system, but as we were discussing, I mean, the idea that there are people who are high up and people who are low and people who work for you and people who are your slaves, all of that is there. But even towards slaves, there is a certain threshold of you cannot be barbaric or cruel. That's the point that he emphasizes. Now, he doesn't talk, there is no, and there is another interesting thing, and that is about prisoners. You know, even people who are facing death penalty, there is death penalty. So even killing is something in certain conditions is permitted, right? People who have killed others, and you know, I don't know, there's no detailed treatment of that, but there are people who are awaiting death penalty. But even those people have to be treated with dignity. And even they have to be given an opportunity to appeal. That is there in, I can't remember the edict, and, you know, for example, if they have their last wishes, maybe this is something which I'm making up, but this is how I remember. I haven't read it recently. But if they have their last wish to do this or that, I mean, that has to be met. And that is something that is only possible if you treat them with some concern and dignity. It may not be, it's not equal respect, but it's some. And women is left, you know, it's how he expects women to be treated. He doesn't treat them separately. But I think it's implicit that no matter which Pashanda women, to which women belong, whether and which Shreni, what kind of work, if they're doing, you know, what work, you know, they also have to be treated with dignity, is something which is, in my view, implicit, even though he doesn't mention, he probably doesn't treat, obviously they're not equal. That would be asking for too much in that, but there is some dignity. And there is only one group where you can have some doubt, but even there, it's the Adivasis, the so-called tribal people, where
Atavikas.
Atavikas. Yes. There, I think he says that I'm going to, you know, there's a warning which is given to them, basically saying you also conform to this Dhamma. Because if you do not conform to Dhamma, then I'll, you know, I'll compel you to. So there's a threat there. But basically the idea is that those people should come within this moral order of not being cruel, not being violent, you know, being obedient to their elders, listening to them, honoring Brahmanas and Shamanas, because for him, rightly or wrongly, there's no other way to find out, these are people who are kind of outside the fold, and if they do not listen to him or do not come under his, because they are living in his territory, right? So everybody who lives in his territory must conform to the king's Dhamma. And he seems to think that they are not doing it. And he wants to compel them to do it. And whether, I mean, that hermeneutic charity, he doesn't seem to display that these people have their own worldview, their own perspective, and so on. But I think...
Second one?
Second question.
Very
So second question is for Professor Rajeev.
Yeah.
So when you were talking about how he was navigating, or his strategies for navigating differences between the groups, right? I couldn't also help but observe that so many of the dictates that he had, whether it is listening or trying to learn from the other people, and maintaining restraint in terms of speeches and speaking only when appropriate, they're all interpersonal dictates, right? So how they should try to navigate differences amongst them. But let's say when we contrast that with how we moderns think of like a secular ethic, they're all very state driven or very structural kind of dictates, be it in terms of rights or whatever it is. So did Ashoka also have beyond this interpersonal kind of dictates for navigating difference, did he also have any statist or structural kind of
state I mean, he's the
state,
right? So it's not as if there is something, there's no idea of a state which is separate from the ruler. That's a very modern idea anyway. The state is the ruler's state. That's what the state is, if the word is to be used. It is very different from a modern state, where at least in principle and in norm, the state is separate from the ruler and the ruled. Both. It's an independent, relatively independent institution or apparatus of a cluster of institutions, and that's obviously not there. So it's a personalized thing. Now there is, it's possible. He talks about how there are two ways by which he can, get people to I wouldn't like to use the word conform, but to adopt the Dhamma. One is through niyama, which would be law or something like that, which is backed by danda. The other is nijayati, which is more by deliberation and by persuasion. And he says that Dhamma has to be taught through persuasion and through mutual deliberation rather than through niyati, by law. So it's not that he doesn't have the idea that there are rules which are coercive. Every ruler will have something like that. But he doesn't think that you can force people to conform to the Dhamma. It has to be through. And therefore, he sets up, it's a whole pedagogic program. What you find in the inscriptions is a whole program of education, or of people, educating people and to persuade them to adopt his Dhamma. But it's through meetings, it's through public exchanges. And I mean, he has these inscriptions everywhere. You can say that this is the more impersonal. See, the personal thing is everybody talks to, people have big public arenas where they assemble and they talk to one another, which is the only thing which I can imagine to be possible, in the absence of any other form of media. People can only talk to each other, and there is not even writing, right? But the other thing is these inscriptions themselves, which are all over India in different languages and different scripts, and they are meant to be for people who are literate, which must be very few. They can go and read them, but mostly they are to be, they are there, and people. Ashoka sends his Dhamma Mahamatas or even lower officials to go and read them out, so that people can listen and get inculcated, initiated, and be informed and be educated in them. His own example is very important. He wants to be an exemplar himself. He says it at a number of places. So I think it's through example, through instruction, but he doesn't think that it's going to come by simply being born in a family or in a small, you can't learn it just by being in your village. It's something that has to be done through some other agency, And the agency is what he creates in the form of this is an institutionalized form of formal educators, the Dharma Mahamattas.
Just a quick follow-up. So, I asked the flip question of, is there any structural or this thing? When we think of like a secular ethic today, we don't seem to think in these terms, right? Listening to other people, learning from others. It seems to come in a different register, but not in, let's say, very political debates on secularism. So I just want to get your thoughts on
Well,
why.
I mean, we have interconnected, intercommunicating multiple media, right?
Right.
This is the modern public sphere, which is very different from the older publics. Today's, you write a letter in the newspaper on an article which is written in the newspaper. You write a letter, it may be picked up by somebody on television. It now may be put on, somebody will just put it on social media, then it'll get to, and it's all over India, it's probably all over the world, and people exchange things to each other, and sometimes they disagree even more violently, which is what is happening these days. But potentially they can also come to a common agreement on the basis of the same disputes, some disagreements, disputes, and so on. So the nature of the public sphere is completely changed now. I mean, that kind of technology is not available at that time. There's hardly, I mean, how many people would move from wherever they are located to another place? The only way in which to communicate is by being face to face. But these are, like in the Greek, the public agoras, public spaces. Those public spaces, I mean, we were talking about it the other day that, I mean, I think that he wants to initiate a major change in the nature of the public space. A public space where the Vedic sacrifice was performed. He doesn't want that. He wants that public space, and these are alongside them or independently of them, there were samajas, which were fairs, markets, festivities, hulla gulla, all kinds of people intermingling and, sites of merriment, right? He wants those public spaces to be replaced by more kind of, what can you say? I mean, I'm using the word, but agonistic, in discursive, agonistic public spheres where people converse with each other, debate with each other, discuss with each other, and potentially arrive at some kind of a consensus. But if not a consensus, at least listen to one another and, understand each other better and transform their own views after some degree of self-reflection. So that's the kind of public sphere that he wants. That's only possible face-to-face.
What's not
Shankar wanted one. 1 and 2, yeah.
So can I just follow up on what that you were discussing a little bit earlier? So I just want to try to understand how in Ashoka does hierarchy actually contribute to the furtherance of Dhamma? When you say ahimsa is an umbrella concept, it sounds sometimes as if there is some internal possible tension between that and hierarchy and Dhamma. But you have a section, for example, I just want to share 2 pieces. One is in your book, you have said that actually for Ashoka, it appears that the lowly, quote unquote, have more space in their lives to pursue Dhamma than the rich. You say this in the gender and class section, something to this effect?
Well, I don't say that. Ashoka does.
About Ashoka,
Yeah.
which is extraordinary.
Well, Ashoka says in 2 places that he says, what I say is more easy for the lowly to follow than for the rich. That's what he says. And that's all.
Yeah.
So I interpret that meaning that it is easier for the lower people to follow Dharma than for people who are higher. But the thing with, to come back to your major point, Ashoka was not there. The Dharma of Ashoka is not there to produce an egalitarian society. He accepted, as a matter of fact, a non-egalitarian society in which there were servant classes, there were slave classes, right? There were women and there were men. And he doesn't talk a lot about ethnic diversity. He talks about the Atavikas, who were certainly forest people, who were at the bottom of the rung, generally speaking. Yeah, he does not speak about that. But what is clear is that his dharma can be followed and should be followed by everyone, no matter which class they are in. But it appears that when he's actually directing his inscriptions, the self that I put there seems at least implicitly to be a wealthy middle-class household. Because that person is supposed to have relationship to slaves, which implies that the person had slaves, right? It's only implicit. It never says explicitly that the person I'm talking to, but that to a degree, it is understandable, because if he wants to convert an area to his dharma, much easier to do it if certain people of standing are part of that dharma, what he calls dharma yukta, devotees of dharma. So that may be, I think, part of that. But he clearly says that even lowly people, he doesn't define who the lowly people are, but that's all he says, that they can follow, and it's easier for them to follow. Yeah.
So
Go ahead.
oh, okay.
Just to add to what Patrick is saying, I think the first thing is that it's not very clear whether this is a Varna society. Ashoka doesn't use the word Varna anywhere. It's certainly whether there are the only group that is mentioned, which is also reproduced in the Varna system, is there's no use of the word Kshatriya or Shudra or anything. The only word is Brahmin, but Brahmin also in the more ritual specialist religious category, right? So I would say that I make a distinction between ethical pursuit of self-fulfillment through either turning away from the world or by being in the world, and there are many ways in which you can do that. Turn away from the world and look for pursuits either by cessation of action, or by good deeds, or by just waiting for things to happen in a fatalistic way, whatever, or through simply ritual sacrifice, you attain whatever it is that you want. These are different ethics, and there is clearly there is no ordering here. There is no one which is superior to the other. So you can say that there is an egalitarianism in ethics. All of them are equal in the eyes of Ashoka. They're all equal. They're the same. There is no way that you can say this is better than Ashoka. Has his personal views, but in his public philosophy and in his political theory, he wouldn't say this one is superior to the other or this one is higher than the other. He doesn't say that. So there is an ethical pluralism. But in every Pashanda, and he says that every person has an adherence to some Pashanda or the other, everywhere in the world. I mean, out in Greece also, in the frontier, within the country, outside the country, everybody is attached to. And he says there are anek Pashandas, lots of Pashandas. He mentions only 4, lots of Pashandas, everybody is associated. But I would imagine that the high-low, social stratification, which is certainly there, though it is not Varnik, that is reproduced in every Pashanda. Certainly gender classification, gender stratification is there. Gender inequality is there. And as reproduced in the Pashandas, all Pashandas will reproduce they will have servants, they'll have slaves, women will be treated as inferiors in every Pashanda, whether it is Buddhist or whether it is Jain or whether it is, Ajivikas or others who he doesn't mention, or the ritual sacrifice-oriented Brahminical, Vedic Brahminical worldview. All of them will reproduce the same hierarchies. So hierarchy is there, and Ashoka doesn't dispute that, he doesn't question that, but he sustains and he supports ethical pluralism in the way in which I just mentioned. So it's both. And his Dhamma is an all-encompassing thing. I mean, obedience to, so you have to obey, listen to your parents, which you can say is not, egalitarian. But listen to each other is pretty egalitarian when it comes to Pashandas. So it's a mix of both. Dhamma is a mix of both. In terms of Pashanda, there is, I would say, some degree of samatha. There is another word which is very important in Ashoka, and maybe Patrick can mention, which is to administrative officials. He says you have to have vyavahara samatha and dandasamta, is it? Dandasamta. Impartial, and that is impartial. Samatha word is used, so it's impartial. He wants his administrators to be impartial to everybody, equal in his treatment of people when it comes to implementing the laws, following the laws. If they do anything wrong, then they should not be biased in favor of one or the other. It should be equal. So it's complicated. It doesn't really fit into any of the schemas, black and white schemas of egalitarian, caste, non-caste, gender-wise. It doesn't really fit. So you don't have a label here, but you can see that there are all sorts of very interesting ways in which he's handling his own societies and the pluralism, religious or what I call just ethical pluralism in his society.
Yeah. I just had one follow-up on that, which is that since you described as an ancient liberal, Ashoka, something like an ancient liberal,
yeah.
Just to
political.
Okay, so just to be clear, when Ambedkar says that a good man cannot be a master and a master cannot be a good man, Ashoka would disagree. Is that correct?
Yes, he would disagree. I mean, we were talking about it just today, the difference between Dhamma and Shila. Shila. So Shila, the quality of being a Shila, and Ashila, and Dhamma. And somewhere it came up, I don't know whether it is present in the inscriptions or not, but it is in the inscriptions, that people who have Shil can also have Dhamma. No. But if you don't have Shil, you cannot have Dhamma.
What's Shil?
Shil is...
Shila. Like Panchashila you have in Buddhism.
It's something to do, some basic sort of goodness or basic disposition to do the good, some virtue, right? I mean, that is something which he assumes is, that disposition is there in all humans. But that doesn't mean that everybody is going to follow Dhamma, Ashoka's own Dhamma, or, you can always do the opposite. You can be a Shil, but Shil is something. So I think if goodness and, obviously, I mean, modern sensibility, you and I would agree with Ambedkar and not with Ashoka. But then Ashoka that's what is the big schism or gap or chasm between us and Ashoka.
Ambedkar speaks as an activist for the modern world. So he's giving an agenda for what we should be. What we are dealing with Ashoka is what was there at that particular time historically. And during the early period, even in the Christian Bible, New Testament, slavery is taken for granted and never disputed. Slaves, obey your master, says St. Paul. So, so in a sense, what Ashoka does is nothing remarkable. It would have been remarkable if he had freed all the slaves and said, no longer there's going to be any slaves. That would have been remarkable for his time, right? He did many remarkable things, but not that, clearly, yeah, right. So, yeah, you want to ask a question, waiting there for a long time.
So my question is for Professor Bhargava. So I'm an undergraduate student. So we are studying Indian political thought.
Where are you, sorry?
SZTB Khalsa College.
Ah, all right.
So we are studying Bhikkhu Parekh. Professor Parekh says that the tradition of Indian political thought doesn't actually constitute a concise philosophy of its own. I actually want to know Ashoka's position in that whole thing of political philosophy. I mean, does Ashoka give us a way to, does Ashoka present us a concrete political philosophy of his own? This is my first question. And second, that you have been speaking about religionization, and in a recent interview for your book Reimagining Secularism, you have said that religion is actually an import in India, a 16th, 15th century, 15th, 16th century import. So I want you to shed some more light on that as well.
The second bit we can spare everybody, because it's not related to Ashoka.
Oh, yeah.
Although it is, you are right. I mean, I could say a couple of things about it. But the first point was about Bhikkhu's claim about political philosophy. Now, systematic academic philosophy is very different from, philosophy as a spiritual exercise or as a way of life, which the Greeks followed and the Buddhists followed and the Jains followed. We didn't have academic philosophy. That is a modern invention, institutionalized academic philosophy. If you judge by those standards, one can say that we didn't have a political philosophy, but that is, I don't think, Bhikkhu would like to say that. I mean, he probably said it polemically and to shake up things. But I think I would, if he was to take it seriously, if he was to say it seriously, I would say that is wrong. The form, for example, nobody would deny that Arthashastra at least is a political treatise. And it is a treatise which everybody has acknowledged is a shastra, right? Theory. It's a theory. Arthashastra, at least the Brahminical version is a shastra. So it's a political theory text. So we have a tradition of political theory, but it's true that many of us haven't taken that tradition as seriously as we should have taken it earlier. We've been far more, we've been more enamored by political philosophy that has come to us through the Western world. We don't know about other cultures. We didn't take the Chinese, the Middle Eastern, the West Asian. We haven't taken any of that. We didn't take Indian philosophy. That's interesting. But I mean, the entire independence movement, some of the greatest political thinking took place in the early 20th century, in the late 19th century. So, I mean, it's just that people, only in the last 20 years, have people begun to excavate that and to make it presentable as a systematic academic phenomena. Before that, they didn't take it seriously. It's our fault. In that sense, Bhikkhu is right that we should have taken it seriously. But now it's the scene is totally transformed. I think there's a lot happening. And even this was not happening in the world, in the ancient, it has not happened for the so-called medieval world. It has happened for the modern world in the last 25, 30 years. It hasn't happened for the ancient world. It hasn't happened for the medieval world. But I think some of us are trying to rectify that. I mean, I've been doing that. I'm not saying that this is, I can't judge my own work. But since 2009, I've been writing on Ashoka. I've been also done a little bit of work on Ashoka and Akbar. I mean, we've set up a whole center here, Institute of Indian Thought, where we get people like Parekh, because they are much more knowledgeable about some of these texts that we want to study. We get them and they study, we study with them. some of these texts to learn. We've even studied the Manu Dharmasastra together. He's done a critical edition of the Manusmriti, which is available, and we've actually read the text with him. We've read the Arthashastra with him. And we've had other people. He's not the only one. There are other people who've come, and we've done. So ancient world we've begun to take seriously. The work is not out yet in the way in which it should have, but it's happening. And I'm sure it will happen for all the periods, because just, if you read the Dharmashastras, for example, you'll get a lot of Brahminical social and political philosophy there. It will be very elitist and a small section. At least get a normative thinking about society and polity from a Brahminical point of view, a proper study. I mean, Ramayana and Mahabharata would be great sources of social and political theory and philosophy. It will not have this form, because they're the Puranas, Itihasas, and so they will not have, you will not. But then it's up to us to give them whatever form. We should be sincere and truthful to the content, and we should try and have that hermeneutic depth to understand them properly. But the form that we present to them, in the way in which modern academics can fully make, no, I won't say sense, but it's more in tune with their sensibilities. That is something that we will have to do. It is, why should people, the people who have given the Mahabharata to us are not going to respond? They're not responding to our academic preferences. They've composed their things, and they were written at a certain time. So it will happen, but it should have happened earlier. But it's only the last 30 years or so where it didn't. Before that, every important thinker who was an activist as well, but also a great intellectual, was thinking about these. Look at the commentaries on the Gita by practically everybody who was part of the independent movement. Look at the commentaries on the Gita. From Tilak to Gandhi to Lajpat Rai to, you name anybody who was involved in it. So you'll find a lot. It's just that we haven't done that work in the systematic way in which we should have continued that, but that got disrupted.
Something that is interesting, I'm working with a friend, colleague, on international law in ancient India. And that is interesting because they were not writing international law like we think of today. So they were not writing for us. They were writing for what they were doing at the time. So we cannot come up with a category saying political theory or political science and say, hey, you guys didn't do it. That's silly, right? So what we have to see is what they have done and how that can relate to some of the things that we are trying to do today. So in terms of international relations, then we ask the question, what is international? What does the term mean? It is between nations. But modern nation states started only a century, 2 centuries ago. So basically you are saying that there's no international law in pre-modern times. Fine, then go home, right? There's nothing to talk about. But if you're trying to find parallels, then we had to redefine state or nation and say what sort of analogous polities existed in ancient times, and were there laws that were applicable across those political boundaries, polity boundaries, right? Then we can have a discussion, fruitful discussion about that. And I think we can think of the Dharmashastras of all things as propounding an international law. Because the Dharmashastras thought that the Dharma they were inculcating, they were preaching, was above every polity. It stands alone and it's applicable everywhere. So in a sense, what they're saying that even in mundane things like vyavahara, which means legal procedure, to be conducted in a court of law, they think that that procedure that they are giving is applicable throughout the country, irrespective of the polity. So that is at one level an international law that we are talking about, right? So it's a similar to canon law. Canon law is a Catholic law, okay, that does not respect political boundaries. It is applicable in everything. So within the narrow context of Catholic Church, the canon law is international law. It's applicable in Sri Lanka as well as in Japan, as well as in Rome. So I think we can come with Sharia is another similar thing, right there. So I think we can come up with international law and similar things across the ancient world that are analogous to what we are dealing with, not exactly the same.
I want to just add two things. One is that this is a bit of a collective publicity, self-publicity, because there are two books to which both of us have contributed. These are books on, I think, on international affairs, comparing India and China on in ancient Indian and Chinese thought. Maybe I forget the name of there's a book edited by Roger Ames, which is coming out in a few days. I don't know what the name of the book is.
I don't think is it there?
I don't know. I think, one is a book, Bridging Two Worlds, Comparing Classical Political Thought and Statecraft in China and India, edited by Daniel Bell, Amitav Acharya. If you want to look at it, see it under Bhargav. In this book, but Patrick has an article in that. If you look at the bibliography and see it as under Rajeev Bhargava, the books listed, the last article which is listed is the name of the book, and this is available free
You can
on the website.
put
This book,
Bridging Two Worlds.
Bridging Two Worlds.
Yeah, on Google you will get it, and you can download it free.
And there is another book for which both of us have contributed, I think. This is the Roger Ames's book. My article, I remember, it's called Neither War or Conquest, The Idea of a Global Political Order in Ashoka Dhamma. I don't know what Patrick's is called, but these are, I mean, in contribution to, you might say, international order or something like that, which are just.
The next book is coming.
No, that book is out. It's maybe 3-4 days. 31st October is the date when it will be published. I got it. Huh?
You found it?
You found it? It's by Roger Ames and once. No, that is another. That is one book. Second is this one. And the other thing
Who's
is,
publishing that?
I don't remember. I don't know. I mean, I can't remember the name of the publisher, but this one is published by
Columbia.
Stanford.
California.
California. Daniel A. Bell is the one. And then there is another one by Roger Ames. So the new things are coming out, and it's got Upinder Singh in it. And there's another ancient Indian historian, and so India-China combination. There's another book which is coming out, which is a result of a conference which was held at the center by Parekh Institute. I'm at fault because I didn't do my work in time. I had some issues. So, but it's good. It's ready, and it will be out early next year. I can't remember the name of the book, but it's again Indo-China comparison on. It's on the ends of human life. It's more philosophical, and this book. So that's one. Work is being now happening, and I'm sure this is not the only. There must be others doing very similar work. Which one? Which one? No, ये तो आपको वैसे ही free मिल जाएगा. The other thing I wanted to say was that 6 years ago, there's a book which Patrick has brought out called the Oxford, what is it? The Hindu Law. that you and Donald
Oh,
Davis.
yeah, yeah.
So
History of Dharmasastra.
History of Dharmasastra, and for which Patrick very kindly invited me to write, make a theoretical, political theory perspective on that. But I felt incompetent at that time. Even now, I feel a little incompetent. But I could have contributed to it if he was as lazy as I am. But he's quick, he produces a book within, if he gives it time, you have to finish it and then it'll come out. But I didn't feel I had the ability to write something 5 years ago on the topic that he had suggested. So I said yes, but I kind of developed cold feet and I left it. If 2 years from now, if he asked me again, I'd say yes and do it. I'm getting better. So things are changing.
Yeah. Well, we have almost come to 5 o'clock. Anything more?
I mean, Patrick is tired, I'm sure. I'm fine. I can take another. It's listed 2:30 to 5:30.
Yeah, okay.
Yeah, but maybe you want, either of you can ask.
Okay.
Acha.
You
ask
first.
Sir, it's a very good, sir. That is, we have learned so many things. The way you are defending Ashok Dharma, sir, can we say that it is equivalent to justice as it unifies like liberty, equality, fraternity, sir? And you say that it is more important to respect human dignity rather than giving just equality, something like that one. So can we say that Dhamma is something like equivalent to justice that we see or we perceive in a very formal notion, something like that?
I would say there is a conception of justice in Ashoka, and you can interpret Dhamma through justice, but why would I want to do that? Why would I want to locate it somewhere in reference to some idea? I would just treat it on its own terms and make other, concepts. If they speak to them, I will spell them out, but I wouldn't go and try and translate it into something, as freedom or equality or justice. I think it would just unnecessarily violate the integrity of the text that I'm reading. I would just go by that rather than, look at it from another framework. Our whole attempt should be not to be close to concepts that are coming from elsewhere. How can we be? That is impossible. We live and always lived in a hybrid world. We are always using, we write in English. We are trained in a certain discipline, and even that goes even for Patrick, even though he's much better trained in what so-called Indic studies than most people I know. But I don't think that should be our aim. If these connections are made organically by reading and thinking about these texts, we'll do that. But I won't search for equality in this text. Why the hell should I? It's not necessary. It's in any case a text 2,300 years old. There is no need for it to be tallying with our modern worldview. We can read it. We have to historicize it, give it, read it with a great amount of hermeneutic charity, try and understand it on its own terms, and see what lessons we can draw. I'm open to the idea that on some issues, these texts have much better things to say than any modern person. That I'm open. I don't see that, these are things of the past and therefore they belong only to the past and don't speak to us. Why should I think like that? I don't think that apart from, modern technology and to some extent on political inclusiveness, I don't think we've made any substantial progress. over a period of time. I think in many matters, maybe people in the past were much better ethically and morally than we are. Maybe there is a regress. I'm open to that idea. So I don't know if I've answered your question, but
You're saying
Yes.
Sir, my question is like we are talking about the morality and like, so what is right and what is wrong? It depends on the perspective. Like, sir, I read one book like Demystifying Leadership Qualities from Mahabharata. So there, everybody is right or wrong, we don't know. Like Kunti knows this Karna, his son, but she never told whether the war is going to be happened, and she fear that her 5 sons can killed by the other party. So that is also a dharma if you think. Like, so what is dharma? Like, sir, I read one more book like the Dharma Manifesto. He is an American author, but he is a very religious. So he had given the definition, the natural law of the humanity. So everywhere there it is very much confusion. So what is dharma? And that is
Thank you. Yeah, I know. So yeah, if you can give me that answer, or somebody can give me, I'll give you a lot of money for that, you know. Yeah, right. So the issue is why you cannot come with a single definition of dharma in India is because the Indians refuse to give it a single definition of dharma. You have to respect that. Why do you want to find uniformity where the sources themselves don't want to give any uniformity? Dharma was a contested term. It was a idea and a concept over which people disagreed vehemently, right? So the issue is, of course, whose dharma is correct? Why do you say that this dharma? Dharma is generally viewed as what is right, what is an adharma. But with regard to what is right and what is wrong, what is adharma and what there's a dispute, right? Yeah. So if you look at the Dharma Sutras, which were the earliest attempts by Brahmin community, Brahmin intellectuals, to write a treatise on dharma, meaning to tell what Brahminical dharma is, to some degree within the context of what Ashoka has been doing, what the Buddhists have been doing, and they are saying this is ours. It's very interesting that at the very beginning of every text, every Dharma Sutra, there's the epistemological question. Where do we find dharma? What are the sources of dharma? In later texts, this is called Dharma Pramanya or Dharma Pramana. The Pramana is the right sources of knowledge, right? So there are, for normal knowledge, there are various kinds of pramanas. Pratyaksha is one of them. Perception. It tells me there's a book here by your sight. And if you're deaf, you may think there's a book here as I do that, right? Okay, that's pratyaksha. Then there is anumana. Where there is smoke, there is fire. If you see only smoke, you can deduce that there. So these are called pramanas. You're asking the same question with regard to dharma, which is the dharma pramana. So Brahmanical texts, early texts give different definitions of these pramanas. Where do we find them? With the Buddhists, you have a similar thing. Where do you find the Buddhist dharma? And Buddhists are it's very clear for the Buddhists. Buddha Vachana, the words of the Buddha. That is why if you look at any Buddhist sutta, go to the Pali Tripitaka, evam me sutam. In Sanskrit, it will be evam maya shrutam. Thus have I heard. So the Buddhist monk is telling, I heard this. Buddha saying this. So that is the testimony that makes this valid Buddhist dharma. Because somebody heard the Buddha saying it. Without that, you would not get it, right? So this is the problem then when we come to Mahabharata is a special case, right? It is a very complex text where the drama of dharma and adharma is played out in many different ways You can look at Professor Bimal Matilal's 2 books, I think, called Moral Dilemmas in the Mahabharata. It's a very, very important books. So yeah, that is a very difficult. I mean, the way Bhima kills Duryodhana is, of course, adharma, right? He breaks his thigh, which you're not allowed to do, hit below the belt kind of thing, right? So yeah, that's a very difficult, that's a very different kind of I think the Mahabharata is a nicely told tale of the problems of human morality. That Guru Charan Das has written a book called The Difficulty of Being Good. And actually the Mahabharata says how difficult it is to be good because you do not know what is good. You can't in any context say this is good and this is bad. So this is, I think, that's a special case, right? Yeah, of course.
Yeah,
absolutely.
Very fascinating discussion. I think for each community will have several viewpoints, but also might be able to, small community, might be able to evolve certain commonly accepted standards or judgments on what is right and what is wrong, even though there are multiple opinions. And in a society which has got a centralized authority, that person can impose it on others and say, well, now that we've got the right answer, I'll enforce it. Now, but what when we have a largish community, such as the nation state, or a world itself, which is so both at once big and small, where everybody has come together. Whatever each one does has an impact on everybody else. Now, there are multiple viewpoints, multiple opinions, and I think we have to strive to arrive at some common standards, some what are called universals, right? So it won't be enough to say, I will do whatever the Buddha says. Buddha Vachanam is the ultimate. I don't think it's good enough to say that. In a world where there are Buddhists and Jains and Christians and Muslims, nor is it good enough to say that I'll do what Muhammad says. I can't say I'll do what Gita says. I can't. That's not good enough because you're living with so many other people who are not. So we have to come, and this is where Ashoka is relevant. We've got to listen to each other and then arrive at some common standards. We can't just, you can't say, mere yahan to aise hota hai. That's not good enough because you are not living only with tumhare people. You're living with so many other people who are very different from you. So we have to evolve. It is not going to drop from heaven. It is not written in nature. It is something which is evolving through the common experiences of diverse people who will develop certain norms which are common norms. Now, the tendency would be for whoever is hegemonic and whoever is dominant to say, okay, I have evolved these and these are the norms for everybody. But there will be resistance against that. So it is an empirical issue. I am pretty certain that humanity has evolved some norms, very small, but some norms, which are violated all the time, but they are not violated in the shameless manner in which they used to be violated, except for a very short period, probably in the current times. I don't know. Aajkal everything goes. But we have to be a little careful. It's just not right. We have to evolve some common, not just common humanity, principles of common humanity, but we know through Buddhism and through Ashoka that it has to be for all species. It's for the planet. and perhaps even more than the planet. We've got to evolve some common norms. It has to be something which is more than what we have so far. We have to strive for that. Well, that's the only condition of our living at all. I won't just say living together, but our living at all. Our life is not possible without our, so all the failures of, these environmental policies and so on, which we've not been able to evolve and we've not been able to enforce, it's going to be very, very damaging. We better have some universal norms soon if we are to survive. But what we're seeing is we're not even able to accept in our own society certain common norms by which to live. We had the Constitution may be a terrible document in many ways, but at least it's some document which is saying this is the common thing for our times today, which everybody must follow. At least it's an attempt. It's not just for one group or another group or third group. It's for every group. So we shouldn't, it's not enough for us to say that, this is also right, that is also right. Because this would be fine if we were confined to only those people who believe that right. But the world today in which we live is not lived in ghettos. We live together with all our differences. So it's not enough for us to have a relativist view. ये भी ठीक है, वो भी ठीक है, नहीं चलेगा. कुछ ऐसा भी चाहिए जो सबके लिए ठीक है. आपने थोड़े थोड़े इवॉल्व करे हैं ना, वो भी फॉलो नहीं करते. लेफ्ट कोई चलना है, राइट में मत चलिए. लेफ्ट, अब लेफ्ट ड्राइविंग करते हैं, वो भी तो एक रूल ही है ना, उससे हम एक दूसरे को बचाते हैं. अदरवाइज इफ लेफ्ट और राइट दोनों सब लोग चलने लग जाएंगे, then we'll just keep having accidents and we'll die. But we have accepted that. Some people don't follow it, but large people accept it. But those rules, which are moral in some senses also, not technical rules of car, traffic and all that, but those have to evolve. And we'll be failing. This attempt has been going on for a long time. We have to keep sustaining that attempt.
Like nowadays, we are talking about global governance. So,
Kya global governance?
sir, but because I'm adding it like
global governance kahan hai? Gaza, Israel, Ukraine, Russia, kaun si global governance? We are talking for a long time about global governance, but we are ensuring that it all is destroyed. The very rudimentary.
Sir, as we know, the climate problem.
Those are important.
But sir, like BRICS is talking about, no, we will not do, like the Western countries have some different opinion. So everybody have their own perspective. So I'm relating it to this. So it is very difficult for us to have a consensus on some issue. So it is a human nature, like it's very, very confusing. Like what
it is confusing. Yeah. I mean, as Patrick said, if we get the right answer, we will give you a lot of money.
Humans are animals and tribal animals at our root. So when tribal, I mean, small group existence, I think. And I think every time we go beyond that, it's a struggle. And that struggle continues, even nation state. The nation state is not a tribe. It's too large to be a tribe. It's so to maintain a nation state is always a struggle to make these people feel that they are belonging to a larger whole. And you're talking about
the world,
whole world,
whole humanity.
And theoretically, that should be a laudable goal for all of us, that human beings live in this planet and becoming smaller and smaller, and the environmental damages that we are talking about that could, basically destroy all of humanity, makes some amount of global governance or global laws. We have some laws still, laws of the sea and etc. But they may be imperative in the future, and maybe it'll be too late when we come to do that.
Anyway, I think we are. Patrick is a good 10 years older than I am. I'm pretty tired, and I'm sure he must be 10 times tired. So I think
I'm younger than you in spirit.
Oh, man, of course you are. I totally agree with that. But I think we've had a very good
No,
session. Patrick has
thank
been
you.
splendid, and thank you all of you for
Thank
being
you for
present.
coming, yes.
And I'm sure some of you would like to get autograph your book. So he'll take another couple of minutes to do that. But thank you, all of you. And thank you, Kumkum and
Thank you,
and
Kumkum.
somebody, Afroz.
I
for
can't hear you,
being-
but
You've been
lovely to meet
we
you.
can see
online.
that you are still around. Out of the many others have given up, but
Yeah,
you are still there. So lovely having you, and thanks a lot.